Before this story begins, take a deep breath and close your eyes for a moment. What you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's an open wound, a heartbeat of every woman who once loved the wrong person and still found a way to survive when the world told her she couldn't. If you believe that real stories have the power to heal, to open eyes, and to give back the strength that life tried to take away, then you belong here. Subscribe now and walk with me through every word. Because here, every story is a mirror. And maybe, just maybe, inside this one, you'll find a piece of your own. I still remember the smell before anything else. The thick scent of burned rubber from the police tires outside, mixed with the metallic taste of fear that coated my tongue. It was past midnight when the sirens finally stopped in front of my house. And by then, I already knew there was no turning back. The bedsheets were stuck together, glued so tightly they looked like part of their skin, and the look on his face, the shock, the panic, the guilt, burned itself into my memory like acid. I stood by the door, barefoot, holding the empty tube of super glue in one hand and the phone in the other. I wasn't crying. I thought I would, but I didn't. I just watched them, the two people who had stolen my peace, now trapped in the very place where they had taken everything from me. When the police broke through the door, I didn't scream. I didn't explain. I simply said, "They're not hurt. They just can't move." And then I stepped aside. The officers rushed in, confused, pulling at the sheets, cutting through fabric that refused to separate. My husband's voice cracked first, begging, shouting my name, calling me crazy, saying it wasn't what it looked like. But it was exactly what it looked like. I had spent years cleaning other people's houses, folding their sheets, cooking their meals, keeping their secrets. That night, I finally stopped hiding mine. The neighbors stood outside, whispering in Spanish and English, trying to understand what kind of woman could do something like that. I could feel their eyes piercing through the curtains, labeling me with words they didn't even know how to pronounce. Immigrant, psycho, abused, vindictive. Maybe I was all of them. Maybe I was none. But for the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the strange calm that comes after surviving too much. I watched the officers lift the sheets, revealing the woman who had been sleeping with my husband in my bed, her mascara melting, her skin sticking to the cotton. She wouldn't look at me. He did. And in his eyes, I saw the reflection of everything he thought I would never become. Someone capable of fighting back. As they led me outside, I thought of all the nights I had waited for him to come home, all the excuses I had built inside my mind to protect the illusion of our life. I remembered the promises, the paperwork, the green card applications he said were almost ready. I remembered the lies about the overtime shifts, the business trips, the missed calls. Every broken piece of those years was there, standing in front of me, wearing my husband's shirt and someone else's perfume. When they put me in the back of the police car, I looked at my hands again. Small, brown, calloused from years of cleaning. I wondered how those hands had done this, how they had gathered enough courage to turn pain into action. I wasn't proud. I wasn't sorry either. I felt something else, a hollow quiet that filled every corner of my body, the kind that comes after you've given everything you had, and the world still asks for more. Through the window, I saw the flashing lights bouncing off the walls of the house I had built with him. Every lamp, every photograph, every trace of our story was being erased under that red and blue glow. The officers spoke softly, like they were afraid of breaking me even more. One of them asked if I needed medical attention. I told him no. What I needed, they couldn't give me. Years of my life back, my dignity, my belief that love could ever be safe. When the other woman finally screamed my name, I turned my head and met her eyes for the first time. She didn't look like a monster. She looked like me, years ago, desperate for affection, blind to the warning signs, willing to believe the lies. For a second, I felt pity, and then I remembered how it felt to wake up alone on the nights he said he was working late, how I blamed myself for not being enough. Pity vanished, replaced by a quiet understanding of what betrayal does to a soul. As the police car started moving, I whispered to myself, "It's over." But I knew it wasn't. Because behind those flashing lights, buried under the noise of the night, there were still things I didn't know, papers I had signed without reading, promises he had made that were never meant to be kept. The superglue on those sheets was only the beginning. The real trap had been built years before, with love, trust, and my own signature. That night didn't destroy me. It revealed me. It peeled away the obedient wife, the silent immigrant, the woman who smiled through pain. It showed the world a version of me I didn't even know existed, one who could stand in the middle of chaos and still see clearly. And as we drove away, I realized that the worst part of betrayal isn't losing the person you love. It's losing the person you were before you discovered the truth. I came to this country with a suitcase that smelled like my mother's kitchen and a heart full of impossible dreams. I was 23, with rough English, a borrowed coat, and a promise whispered by the man who said he would never let me struggle alone. He met me at the bus station, holding a bouquet of carnations, the kind that die fast but look beautiful for a day. That first night, when he told me this country could be ours if we worked hard enough, I believed him. I believed every word that left his mouth because it felt good to trust again, to think love could be built out of sacrifice and shared hunger. Those first years were a blur of exhaustion and hope. I cleaned offices before sunrise, came home to cook rice and beans, then changed clothes to serve tables until midnight. He said he was proud of me, that my strength made him feel lucky. Sometimes when he brushed the hair out of my face after a long shift, I thought I could see our future reflected in his eyes. A small house, papers with both our names, children running through the hallway. I didn't see the cracks forming then. I didn't want to. Love makes you blind, but survival teaches you how to stay that way on purpose. We didn't have much, but I found happiness in the tiny details. The sound of coffee dripping before dawn, his laughter when we danced barefoot in the kitchen, the scent of detergent on his work shirts. Those were the moments I clung to when the world outside reminded me I didn't belong. He used to tell me that I was too emotional, that my heart was too big for this country. I thought it was a compliment. I didn't understand it was a warning, because one day, that same heart would be used against me, as proof that I was too naive to deserve protection. The first time he raised his voice at me, it was about money. He said I was wasting it on useless things, like sending some to my family back home. I apologized, even though I knew it wasn't wrong. Then it happened again, about something else. The way I cooked, the hours I worked, the way I looked at him when he came home late. The words became sharper, his eyes colder. But every time he softened, every time he said he was just tired, I chose to believe it. I told myself love was supposed to hurt sometimes, that every couple had their storms. There was one night early on when we lay together in bed, and he told me he wanted to start his own business, a small construction company. He said he just needed time and trust. I gave him both. I worked double shifts, sent every spare dollar into his account, and told everyone I knew that my husband was building something for our future. And maybe he was, but I didn't know that the foundation wasn't for us. It was for him. Looking back, I see how the manipulation began in the smallest gestures. The way he would hide his phone when I walked in, the long showers after work. The new cologne, he said, was a gift from a coworker. I asked questions, gently at first, because I still loved him. He'd laugh, call me dramatic, and hold my face like I was fragile. "You're imagining things," he'd whisper. "You know how much I love you." And I did know, or thought I did. I had measured his love in the hours I spent keeping us alive. When my work permit expired and we started the process of renewal, he was the one who handled the papers. He said he was better at English, that he didn't want me to stress. I let him. I trusted him with everything. My name, my signature, my future. I didn't see that he was already planning his escape, already learning how to use the system that had once used us. He promised that as soon as his company was stable, we'd apply for permanent residency. He said it with that same tone he used on the first day, confident, loving, persuasive, the kind of voice you build your life around. In the evenings, when we were too tired to talk, I would watch him from the couch, his profile lit by the blue glow of the TV. the quiet hum of his phone vibrating every few minutes. He smiled sometimes when he read messages, and when I asked, he'd say it was just work. I remember thinking how proud I was of him, how grateful I felt that I had found someone who wanted the same future I did. It's strange how you can be living inside your own betrayal and still call it love. If I could go back, I would tell that younger version of myself to listen to the silences, not the words. I would tell her that love isn't proven by endurance, that sacrifice doesn't guarantee loyalty. But I didn't know any of that then. All I knew was that I was tired, and I needed to believe that everything I'd lost, my country, my language, my youth, had been for something real. So when he kissed me goodnight and whispered, "We're almost there," I believed him. I didn't realize that the there he spoke of wasn't the life we were building together. It was the life he was building without me. It began so quietly that I almost missed it. Love doesn't disappear with a scream. It fades with whispers, with the small absences that settle into the corners of your days until they feel natural. At first, it was the silence during breakfast. He used to talk about everything, the people at work, the weather, the plans for the weekend. Then one morning, he stopped. He ate in silence, scrolling through his phone, nodding to himself as if he lived in another world that no longer included me. I told myself it was stress, that his business was consuming him. I refused to see that it was already consuming us. His eyes changed before his words did. When he looked at me, it wasn't with anger or affection. It was indifference, and that was worse. I began to measure love by the seconds he spent looking up from his phone, by the tone of his good night. He started to come home late, smelling like cologne I didn't recognize, the kind that didn't belong to the aisles we could afford. When I asked, he said the company had new clients, that he was networking. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Networking. It sounded like a lie wearing a suit. The phone became our third guest at the table. It buzzed constantly, day and night. Sometimes he would step outside to answer, speaking in a tone too low for me to catch. Once, I followed him to the porch, just to hear the end of a conversation. His voice was soft, the kind of softness he hadn't used with me in months. When he saw me, he hung up fast, his face hardening into that familiar mask of control. "It's work," he said, and I smiled like I believed him. Because believing was easier than admitting I was losing him. The first real fight happened over something small, a missed call from me. I had been worried. He was 3 hours late. When he walked in, I asked where he'd been, and he snapped. "Do you have any idea how much pressure I'm under?" he shouted. His voice echoed off the walls of our small kitchen. I wanted to disappear into the tiles. I apologized again and again, even though I didn't know what for. He threw his jacket on the chair and went to shower. I stood there, frozen, the smell of his cologne filling the air like proof of another woman's existence. From that night on, I learned to be quiet, to cook without asking if he'd eat, to smile when he ignored me, to lie awake pretending I was asleep when he came home after midnight. The bed that once felt too small for the two of us became a cold, empty field between strangers. I'd wake up to find him already dressed, sipping coffee in silence, eyes fixed on his phone. Once I saw a reflection on the screen, a woman's name I didn't recognize. My chest tightened, but I said nothing. I was afraid that speaking the truth would make it real. There were other signs. The new clothes he didn't let me wash, the sudden interest in the gym, the way he flinched when I reached for his hand. Even the music changed. He stopped playing our favorite songs, saying they gave him headaches. It wasn't the songs that hurt him. It was the memories they carried. Memories of a time when he still loved me, or at least pretended to. I tried to fight for us in the only ways I knew how. I cooked his favorite meals, left notes in his lunch, waited up to talk when he came home. Sometimes he would respond with a smile, and for a moment, I'd believe everything was fine. But the next day, he would disappear again into that world behind his screen, and I'd be left wondering if the man sitting beside me was just a ghost wearing my husband's face. One Sunday, I followed him. I told myself it wasn't spying. It was protecting my marriage. He said he was going to meet a client downtown, but I watched him drive in the opposite direction, toward the part of town we never went to. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I followed from a distance. He parked in front of a small cafe. She was already there, waiting. Young, pretty, confident. They hugged like people who had done it many times before. I watched through the window as they laughed, his hand resting on hers, their bodies leaning closer than words would allow. I wanted to run inside, to scream, to throw everything I had at them. But I didn't move. I just sat there, gripping the wheel, tears streaming down my face, realizing that the life I had built was a lie I'd been feeding myself every day. When he finally came home that night, I asked him how his meeting went. He said it was productive, and I smiled. A perfect, practiced smile. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to his steady breathing beside me. My body felt foreign, my heart heavier than ever. I understood then that betrayal doesn't start with a kiss or a lie. It begins with distance, with the quiet choices people make when they stop caring who gets hurt. And yet, even after everything I'd seen, I couldn't leave. I didn't have the papers. I didn't have the money. But more than that, I didn't have the strength to accept that the man who once promised me the world was already living in someone else's. The morning after I saw them together, the world felt quieter, like everything around me had stopped to listen for my next move. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at the reflection of a woman I didn't recognize. Tired eyes, trembling lips, a face aged by disappointment. I wanted to scream, to tear down every photograph on the wall that still showed us smiling. But instead, I washed my face, put on makeup, and made breakfast. Because pretending was easier than accepting the truth. Pretending was survival. He came down the stairs whistling, smelling like someone else's perfume. I could taste the sweetness of her scent in the air, and it made me sick. He kissed my cheek like nothing had happened, poured himself coffee, and started talking about his day. Meetings, deadlines, things that didn't matter. I listened, nodding, my stomach twisting into knots. That was the day I decided to keep the secret. Not his, mine, the secret that I knew, that I had seen, that I understood who he really was. Loving a liar is like drowning slowly. Every breath you take feels smaller until you can't tell if you're still alive or just surviving out of habit. I told myself that maybe she was a phase. Maybe he would come back to me. Maybe I could forgive him if he only stopped. Every night, I repeated those maybes like prayers. I needed them. Without them, the silence between us would have been too heavy to bear. Sometimes when he looked at me, I thought I saw guilt flicker behind his eyes. But guilt is slippery. It can disguise itself as tenderness, as pity, even as love. He started bringing me gifts again. Flowers, small boxes wrapped in shiny paper, an expensive perfume I didn't need. Each one felt like a bribe, a distraction from the emptiness that had replaced our marriage. I accepted them with a smile, pretending to be grateful. Inside, I was screaming. The nights became harder. He would roll over, his back turned to me, while I stared into the dark, replaying every moment of our life together, searching for the first lie I hadn't noticed. Maybe it was the day he said I didn't need to work anymore, that he would take care of everything. Maybe it was the moment I signed those papers he put in front of me. Immigration documents, he said. Just formalities. I didn't read them. I just trusted him. That trust would later become the weapon he used to destroy me. There was one evening, weeks later, when I finally confronted him. The words burst out before I could stop them. I told him I knew. About her. About the lies. He froze, then laughed. Not the warm laugh I used to love, but a cold, sharp sound that cut through me. "You're imagining things," he said, his voice steady, practiced. "You always do this. You twist everything." I wanted to show him the cafe, the touch, the betrayal, but I had no proof, just the memory of it burned into my eyes. He turned the blame on me. He said I was paranoid, that my jealousy was destroying our marriage, that I didn't appreciate how hard he worked for us. I cried, begging him to just tell me the truth, but he refused. Instead, he held me, whispering that everything was fine, that we needed to start over. I wanted to believe him. I needed to. So I buried my doubt under the same lies he fed me, convincing myself that love could fix what honesty had broken. That was the lie I chose to believe, that if I stayed quiet, if I forgave him before he even asked, he might come back. But love built on silence always ends in destruction. And somewhere deep down, I think I knew that. Still, I stayed. Because where could I go? I was a woman without papers, without family, in a country that already looked at me like I didn't belong. He was all I had, or at least that's what I told myself. The weeks blurred together. He grew bolder, more distant. Sometimes he wouldn't come home at all, and when I asked, he said he was traveling for work. I'd wash the sheets twice before he came back, just to erase the smell of another woman. I convinced myself that was strength, that endurance meant loyalty. I told myself that the love I gave him would one day remind him who I was. But people who betray you never forget who you are. They just stop caring. The day I found the hotel receipt in his coat pocket, everything inside me went quiet. There was no explosion, no tears, just silence. I folded the paper neatly, placed it on the table, and waited for him to come home. When he did, I didn't ask. I didn't fight. I just looked at him and said, "I hope she's worth it." He didn't respond. He didn't have to. His silence was the confession I'd been waiting for. That night, I realized the truth, the cruel, unbearable truth, that the man I loved had died long before that moment. The one standing in front of me was a stranger wearing his skin. And yet, I still couldn't leave, because love, when twisted by fear and dependency, doesn't break cleanly. It rots from the inside, turning you into someone who mistakes endurance for devotion. I slept beside him that night, pretending everything was fine. But inside, something was shifting. A quiet anger began to take shape. Not the kind that shouts or breaks things, but the kind that waits, cold and patient. The kind that plans. I didn't know it yet, but that anger would soon become my only source of strength. And one day, it would lead me to do something that even I didn't believe I was capable of. It was early spring when he came home with that look, the one I had learned to fear, the one that always meant trouble disguised as opportunity. He walked in with a folder in his hand and the faint smell of her perfume still clinging to his clothes. I was cooking dinner. The same meal he had once said reminded him of home. He didn't even glance at it. He just sat at the table, opened the folder, and said, "I need you to sign these." His voice was calm, rehearsed, like someone reading lines from a play he had performed before. The papers looked official. Government stamps, my name printed neatly at the top. Words I couldn't fully understand. "What is this?" I asked, my hands still wet from washing vegetables. "It's just immigration paperwork," he said, smiling like he was doing me a favor. "A renewal, a sponsorship. You know, the usual stuff. But it has to be signed today. There's a deadline." I hesitated, scanning the words, but my English wasn't good enough to understand the small print. He took the papers from my hands, flipped to the last page, and pointed. "Right here," he said softly. "You trust me, don't you?" I did. Or maybe I was too afraid not to. So I signed. My name, written in shaky letters, under a paragraph that would later become my undoing. He kissed my forehead and said, "You did the right thing." Then he folded the papers carefully, as if they were fragile, sacred even, and tucked them into his bag. That was the last time I ever saw that folder. After that day, he became distant in a new way. Not angry, not guilty, just absent. It was as if I had served my purpose. He still came home, still ate dinner, still slept beside me, but there was a quiet satisfaction in his eyes that terrified me. I started to wonder what exactly I had signed. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and replay his words in my mind. The tone, the timing, the false tenderness. Something was wrong. Weeks later, a letter arrived in the mail addressed to him, but marked with both our names. He grabbed it before I could see and slipped it into his jacket pocket. I pretended not to notice, but my stomach twisted into knots. He was hiding something. I could feel it in the way he avoided my eyes. in the way he flinched whenever I walked into the room. Then, one evening, he came home and said he needed a favor. Just one more signature. I asked why he couldn't sign it himself, and he laughed. "Because it's for you," he said. "It's for your protection. If anything happens, this keeps you safe." Those words, "if anything happens," echoed in my head like a warning I didn't understand. He handed me another paper, this one with fewer words but the same official look. My hands trembled as I held the pen. I wanted to read it, to ask more questions, but his eyes were cold and expectant. "Sign it," he said, quieter now, as if daring me to refuse. And I did. Again. Because I was still that woman who wanted to believe love could be fixed. Afterward, something in the house changed. He stopped talking altogether, started sleeping on the couch, and left before dawn. His clothes smelled like a different world. Perfume, cigarettes, a hint of freedom. I would find receipts in his pockets for restaurants we never went to, hotels in cities we'd never visited together. I stopped asking. My silence became my prison. One night, as I cleaned the kitchen, I found a torn envelope in the trash. Inside was a copy of a letter from an immigration office dated weeks before. It mentioned my name, a case number, and words I didn't fully understand. Status review, petition withdrawal, sponsorship termination. My heart froze. I read it over and over until the meaning sank in. He wasn't renewing my papers. He was ending them. That's when I realized what his favor had been. The documents I had signed were not to protect me. They were to remove me. He was revoking his sponsorship, the very thing that kept me legal in this country. Without him, I would have nothing. No status, no rights, no home. That night, I confronted him again, the letter shaking in my hand. "What is this?" I asked, my voice breaking. He didn't even look surprised. "You don't understand how things work here," he said. "It's better this way." I asked him what this way meant, and he just smiled. That same cold, empty smile. "You'll go home," he said. "It's not safe for me to keep you here anymore. For him, not for me." I felt the room spin. The man who had sworn to protect me, who had begged me to trust him, had just turned me into a problem he wanted to erase. My knees went weak, my vision blurred, and I sank to the floor, clutching that paper like it was a death sentence. Because it was. He had planned it perfectly. The lies, the documents, the timing. And all the while, he kept loving someone else. He left the house that night without saying another word. I sat there for hours, staring at the door, realizing that I had signed away not just my papers, but my freedom. And for the first time, I felt something stronger than heartbreak. I felt rage. Cold, calculated, patient rage. The kind of rage that waits for its moment. The day I discovered the full truth, the world stopped pretending to be kind. It was a Tuesday, warm and quiet, the kind of morning when life tries to fool you into thinking everything is still normal. I was cleaning the house, folding the same sheets I used to wash with love, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number, just one picture and a line that said, "You deserve to know." I opened it and saw him, my husband, sitting at a restaurant, holding the hand of the woman I'd seen before. But this time, there was something different. Paperwork spread across the table, his pen in motion, her smile bright and careless. In the background, I could see the same immigration seal I'd seen on the documents he once made me sign. My blood went cold. I zoomed in on the image, my fingers trembling, and saw my own name on one of the forms. It wasn't a renewal, not even a petition. It was a statement of withdrawal, a declaration that I was no longer under his sponsorship, no longer his legal responsibility. He had ended everything, quietly, strategically, while smiling at another woman across the table. And from that moment, the world around me changed colors. The walls looked smaller, the air heavier, the silence unbearable. Everything I had built, every sacrifice, every dream I'd held on to was nothing more than a backdrop for his betrayal. I felt sick, like I could taste metal in my mouth. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the phone. The sound of it hitting the floor echoed through the room like a gunshot. I sat down, breathing hard, realizing I was now invisible in a country that didn't even know my name. Without his sponsorship, I was undocumented again. He had taken everything, not just love, not just trust, but my existence. And he had done it with the same calm precision he used when he told me he loved me. That evening, when he came home, I didn't say anything. I watched him walk through the door like nothing had happened, humming a song, tossing his keys on the counter. He poured himself a drink, took off his shoes, and sat down like it was any other day. He didn't notice the way I was staring at him, the way my silence had changed shape. There was something dark in me now, something patient and deliberate. I didn't recognize it, but I didn't fear it either. He looked at me once, smirked, and said, "You're quiet tonight." I just nodded. Because what could I say? That I knew? That I had seen the photo? That I understood he had stolen my future while kissing her hand in broad daylight? He poured another drink and raised the glass like a toast. "To new beginnings," he said. I smiled. I think that was the moment something inside me broke. Not from pain, but from clarity. I finally understood the kind of man I had married. Later that night, I sat on the floor of our bedroom, surrounded by the ghosts of everything I had built. The dress I wore at our wedding, now folded in a box under the bed. The letters we used to write to each other when we were young. The faded photographs of two people who no longer existed. I stared at the sheets, the same ones we had shared for years, and felt a bitter laugh escape my throat. That bed had been my temple, my shelter, the place where I dreamed of a life that never came. Now it was the scene of every betrayal. And that's when I thought of it. The glue. The one I kept in the kitchen drawer, strong enough to fix anything that broke, except a heart. The thought came to me like a whisper, like the kind of idea that isn't really born but revealed. I took the bottle in my hand, turned it over, and watched the thick liquid slide slowly down the inside. It wasn't rage that guided me, not madness either. It was justice, my own kind, the kind that women like me never get from the world. The next day, I prepared everything calmly. I changed the sheets, washed the blankets, cleaned the room until it smelled like lavender and silence. I knew he would bring her here eventually. He had been getting careless, and I could feel it coming. That night, he told me he'd be staying late. I smiled, nodded, kissed his cheek, and said, "Take your time." He came home at dawn. I pretended to be asleep when they entered, whispering and laughing, two people too blind to see what waited for them. I heard the sound of clothes hitting the floor, of soft moans turning into sighs, then silence, then confusion, and then the sound of panic, sharp, desperate, real. They were stuck. The glue had hardened under their weight, sealing them together in the bed they had stolen from me. I didn't rush in. I let them scream for a while. I wanted them to feel what it meant to be trapped, helpless, begging for mercy that never comes. When I finally opened the door, I stood there, calm and quiet. He looked at me with terror in his eyes, shouting my name, begging for help. She cried, her voice cracking under the weight of humiliation. I said nothing. I just picked up the phone, called the police, and said, "There's a domestic disturbance at my address. Please come quickly." As I hung up, I looked at him one last time and said, "Now you know what it feels like to be stuck." He tried to speak, but I turned away. The sirens came soon after. The lights, the noise, the chaos. But inside me, there was peace. The kind that only comes when you stop trying to save someone who enjoys watching you drown. That night, as they dragged him out and the neighbors whispered my name like it was a curse, I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I just stood there, barefoot, watching the pieces of my old life being carried away. Because sometimes, the only way to free yourself from a cage is to burn it down completely. The house smelled like bleach and lavender that morning, a strange mix of purity and madness. I had cleaned everything as if preparing for guests, though in truth, I was preparing for judgment. Every surface shone, every mirror reflected a version of me I no longer recognized. Calm, focused, cold, the kind of calm that only comes after every tear has already been spent. I knew what I was about to do was dangerous, reckless, maybe even unforgivable, but I also knew I had already lost everything that mattered. Love, trust, a name that meant safety. He had stripped it all away, piece by piece, until I became a ghost in my own house. So I decided that if I was to vanish, I would do it on my own terms. I had spent days watching him, studying his patterns. The messages on his phone came at the same time every evening. The perfume on his collar had the same sweetness, faint but persistent. He was predictable now, confident that I was broken enough to stop fighting. But he had forgotten something. Broken things cut sharper than whole ones. And I had learned to live in silence, to plan in stillness. He believed he had buried me beneath shame, but he had only buried my fear. The night before it happened, he kissed me on the forehead before leaving, as if to remind me that I was still under his control. I smiled at him, and for the first time in years, the smile felt real. Not from love, but from certainty. I waited until the sound of his car disappeared down the road. Then I opened the drawer and took out the bottle. The same super glue I had once used to fix broken cups, torn soles, cracked furniture. The irony didn't escape me. Now I was using it to fix something else entirely. I moved like someone in a trance. I stripped the bed, poured the thick liquid into long, invisible lines across the fabric, pressing the edges together just enough to keep them in place. The scent was strong, chemical, bitter. It filled the room until I could hardly breathe. My hands were trembling, but my heart was steady. I layered it beneath the sheets, along the seams where their bodies would touch, where heat and sweat would do the rest. It wasn't rage that guided me. It was precision, the kind of quiet calculation that grows inside a person who has been pushed too far. When I finished, I opened the window to let the air clear and sat on the edge of the bed. The moonlight cut across the room, silver and sharp, and I thought about the girl who had arrived in this country years ago with dreams of building a home. She was gone now. What remained was the woman who had learned that sometimes justice isn't loud or noble. Sometimes it's messy, desperate, and born from love turned to ash. He didn't come home until dawn. I heard the front door open, soft laughter spilling into the hallway. She was with him again. The same woman from the cafe. The same one who smiled as she helped him destroy me. They thought I was asleep. I listened to the rhythm of their footsteps, the quiet creak of the stairs, the whisper of fabric being shed. Every sound was a reminder of what had been taken from me. I closed my eyes, waiting for the silence that would follow. It came, a few minutes later, followed by confusion, a muffled curse, then panic, then screaming. The kind of raw, animal screaming that tears through walls. I stood in the hallway, my heart pounding not from guilt, but from relief. The plan had worked. They were trapped, stuck to each other, to the sheets, to their own shame. Every movement only made it worse. Every struggle a reminder of the bond they had chosen to create. I walked to the door slowly. The room smelled like fear now, sharp and sour. She was crying, begging him to do something. He was pulling, shouting, trying to break free. When they saw me, the room went still. He called my name, his voice cracking. Please, help us. His eyes were wide, wild, searching for mercy. But mercy had left this house long ago. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I just stood there, watching the two of them. The man who had ruined me and the woman who had helped him do it. They looked small now, pathetic, stripped of the arrogance that had once filled this room. You wanted to share everything, I said quietly. Now you have. I picked up the phone, dialed the police, and spoke with the same calm I had once used to tell him I loved him. There's been a domestic incident, I said. You should come quickly. I didn't wait for questions. I hung up and set the phone down. He kept shouting, promising things he could no longer give. Forgiveness, explanations, even love. I walked to the window and opened it wider. Outside, the first light of morning painted the neighborhood in gold. It was beautiful, almost peaceful. I stood there until I heard the sirens, until the flashing lights danced across the glass, and the house filled with the sound of justice coming to collect its debt. As the officers rushed in, as the neighbors gathered to watch, I stayed silent. They didn't know what had led to this. The years of lies, the quiet cruelty, the impossible choices. They only saw the end. A woman standing calm while her world burned behind her. And that was enough, because in that moment, I wasn't the victim anymore. I wasn't even the wife. I was the truth, standing tall amid the wreckage of the lie I had lived for too long. The sirens came before the sun fully rose, their wailing bouncing between the houses, cutting through the early morning quiet like a warning from another world. I watched from the window as the red and blue lights painted the walls of my living room, turning my home into a stage for the final act of our story. The neighbors were already gathering, whispering in their robes, pointing toward the house where the immigrant wife had finally lost her mind. I could almost hear their judgment in the way they stared. The pity, the gossip, the small thrill of witnessing someone else's downfall. When the police knocked on the door, I didn't flinch. I opened it with the same hands that had spent years cleaning floors for people who would never learn my name. My voice was steady when I said, "They're upstairs." The officer's eyes darted past me, scanning the hallway, cautious but curious. He asked if anyone was hurt. "Only pride," I said. And then I stepped aside. They moved through the house quickly, boots heavy on the stairs, radios crackling. I stayed in the kitchen, the smell of coffee and glue still lingering in the air. I heard the first shouts when they reached the bedroom, the confusion, the disbelief, the struggle, then the orders, sharp and professional. "Don't move. Stay calm. We'll get you out." But they couldn't. Not easily. The sheets clung to them like punishment, the glue binding them together in a mess of skin, fabric, and shame. When they finally carried them out, the air felt thick with humiliation. She was crying, her face streaked with tears and makeup, her body trembling. He kept trying to speak, to explain, but every word died on his tongue when he saw me standing there. For a moment, our eyes met. I thought he might say he was sorry, that maybe, beneath all the lies, there was still a piece of the man I once loved. But he didn't apologize. He glared. And that was the final truth I needed. There was no remorse in him, only anger that I had broken the rules of his control. The officers separated us. One of them, a woman with kind eyes, led me outside and asked if I was okay. I nodded. She studied me for a moment, probably wondering what kind of woman could do something like this. I wanted to tell her everything. The years of manipulation, the signatures I didn't understand, the betrayal that stripped me of my name. But I didn't. Words couldn't fix what had already been broken. So I just said, "He took everything from me." And she looked at me like she almost understood. When they put him in the police car, the neighborhood fell into silence. Children clung to their mothers, dogs barked, cameras clicked. Somewhere in the crowd, someone whispered a prayer. He turned once more before they closed the door, his face pale, his jaw clenched. The woman, his mistress, was in another car, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes empty. For a brief second, I almost pitied her. But pity is a luxury you lose when you've had to survive cruelty and silence. I sat on the curb as the cars pulled away, the lights fading into the distance. My hands were still shaking, but not from fear. It was something else. The strange stillness that follows the end of a storm. I expected to feel relief, but what came instead was emptiness. I had dreamed for so long of justice, of making him feel what he made me feel. But vengeance doesn't bring peace. It just clears the air long enough for you to see the ruins you're standing in. Inside, the house felt hollow. The bed was a crime scene now. Tape, gloves, flashlights. The smell of glue had turned bitter, the scent of my own defiance. A detective asked me to sit, to recount everything, to explain why I did it. His voice was calm but curious, as if he were dissecting something fragile. I told him the truth, every detail. The lies, the signatures, the betrayal. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he closed his notebook and said, "You know this will be difficult to prove." I nodded. I didn't care. I wasn't fighting for my case. I was fighting for my existence. Hours passed. The sun climbed high, and the cameras came. Journalists, reporters, Strangers hungry for a story. I saw my face flash on a screen later that day. Immigrant wife traps. Husband and mistress in bed. Police respond to domestic chaos. They said my name wrong. They said I was unstable. They didn't say why. They didn't say what he had done. In the eyes of the world, I was just a woman gone mad. When they finally released me that afternoon, the officer with kind eyes handed me my bag. "Do you have anywhere to go?" she asked. I shook my head. "Not yet." She hesitated, then said softly, "Sometimes people only see what happens at the end. But I think you've been living the end for a long time." I looked at her then, really looked, and saw that she understood more than she was allowed to say. I thanked her, stepped into the sunlight, and breathed. The street was quiet now. The neighbors had gone inside, the reporters gone chasing something else. I stood in front of the house that had once been my whole world and realized I no longer belonged there. The door was open, the rooms empty, the air thick with the ghosts of everything I had endured. I turned my back and walked away barefoot, feeling the cold pavement beneath my feet. Each step felt like a confession, not of guilt, but of truth. I had lost everything, but in losing it, I had finally found the only thing he could never take from me, my voice. And for the first time in years, I let it out. Not in screams, not in anger, but in a whisper that rose into the morning air. "I'm still here." They took me to the station for questioning that same afternoon. The air smelled like metal and stale coffee, the kind of air that never leaves a place built for confession. The officer who escorted me didn't say much. He just handed me a bottle of water and told me to wait. The room was small, the walls gray, the kind of silence that swallows you whole. I had seen enough of these places and cleaning jobs to know how cold they could feel, even when you hadn't done anything wrong. A detective entered with a folder, the kind of folder that carries the truth in pieces sharp enough to bleed. He looked at me for a long time before sitting down. "You've been through a lot," he said. I didn't answer. "But there's something we need to clarify." He opened the folder slowly, sliding a few documents across the table. I didn't recognize the first one at first, until I saw my signature. My own name, curved and trembling, inked beneath a paragraph of English I still couldn't understand. "This is the form your husband filed 3 months ago," the detective said. "It terminates your immigration sponsorship." He paused, searching my face for a reaction. "He also submitted a separate report, claiming that you had forged his name on financial documents. That's why ICE has been reviewing your case." The words hit me like a blow to the chest. I felt my stomach turn cold. "He what?" I whispered. "He reported you," the detective said softly, "as fraudulent, as dangerous." It was like hearing my own death sentence spoken aloud. I had known he was cruel, but this was something else. He hadn't just broken my heart. He had tried to erase me completely, to make sure that when he left me, I wouldn't even exist on paper. I had signed my own disappearance without realizing it. The documents I thought were for love, for protection, had been the knife hidden under his promise. The detective leaned back in his chair. "You're not under arrest," he said. "At least not now. But immigration will want to speak to you." He hesitated before adding, "You should get a lawyer, and you should prepare for what comes next." Prepare. The word sounded absurd. How does one prepare to lose a life twice? I thought of the day I had first arrived in this country, full of hope, believing it was the place where love could rebuild everything I'd lost. I thought of the long nights cleaning offices, of counting every dollar, of sending money home to my mother and telling her I was fine. I had built a life out of scraps, and now it was all collapsing. Not because of a stranger, but because of the man I had trusted most. When they finally let me leave, the world outside felt too bright. The air smelled like exhaust and rain. My hands were shaking as I walked down the steps of the station. I didn't know where to go. The house was no longer mine. My name was no longer safe. I was a woman floating between two worlds, unwanted in one, erased in the other. I found a small motel near the edge of town, paid in cash, and sat on the bed staring at the ceiling. The room was quiet except for the faint buzz of a flickering light. I thought about calling someone, but there was no one left to call. Friends had faded away long ago, silenced by his control. Family was oceans away. I was alone in every sense the word could mean. That night, I pulled the papers from my bag, the copies they had given me at the station, and spread them out on the bed. The dates, the signatures, the stamps. Every page told a story of betrayal disguised as bureaucracy. And at the bottom of one page, I saw it. The final line, the one I hadn't noticed before. Petitioner requests removal of spousal responsibility effective immediately due to evidence of misrepresentation. Misrepresentation. The word felt poisonous. He had called me a liar to protect his own deceit. I began to see the pattern clearly for the first time. He had built it like a chess game. Every lie, every manipulation, every piece moved in silence. The late nights at the office, the sudden insistence that he handle all the paperwork, the affectionate gestures that followed every argument. It was all part of the same strategy. Isolate, disarm, erase. I had been living with a man who treated love as a weapon, marriage as paperwork, and trust as something to be monetized. Tears finally came, not the kind that seek sympathy, but the kind that cleanse. I cried for the years I had given away, for the woman I used to be before he turned me into a shadow of myself. I cried until my body ached, until my voice broke into a sound that didn't even feel human anymore. When the tears stopped, something inside me shifted again. The same cold calm that had guided me before returned, but this time it wasn't driven by revenge. It was born from survival. I realized then that he hadn't destroyed me. He had only stripped away the illusions that kept me weak. He had tried to take my name, my freedom, my dignity, but those were things that could be rebuilt. What he could never take was the truth. I picked up one of the documents and folded it neatly, sliding it into my pocket. Then I looked at the rest. The mountain of lies, the false signatures, the betrayal written in ink. I reached for the lighter I kept in my bag, a small silver one I'd carried for years. With one flick, a flame rose, soft and trembling. I held it close to the papers, watched the corner catch, and saw his lies burn into nothing. The fire danced in my eyes as the ashes fell. It didn't fix anything. It didn't erase the damage. But for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free to face whatever came next, even if it meant starting from nothing again. Because now, I knew what the truth really looked like. It was ugly, it was painful, but it was mine. And for the first time, I belonged to it completely. By the time the flames faded, the room was wrapped in silence. The last curl of smoke rose toward the cracked ceiling, carrying pieces of my old life into the air. I sat on the bed, my hands still trembling, the smell of burned paper clinging to my skin. It wasn't triumph I felt, not revenge, not even relief. It was emptiness, vast and unfamiliar, like walking through the ruins of a home you once built with your bare hands. But in that emptiness, there was something new, a beginning that didn't ask for permission. I stayed at that motel for 3 nights. The walls were thin, the sheets rough, but it was the first place I had ever felt safe in a long time. Nobody knew my name there. Nobody asked where I came from or who I belonged to. For the first time, I wasn't someone's wife, someone's immigrant, someone's burden. I was just a woman breathing, existing, waiting for her heart to remember how to beat on its own. Every morning, I walked to a small cafe nearby, the kind where the owner smiles without judgment and the coffee is strong enough to wake your ghosts. I'd sit by the window, watching people rush by, each of them carrying their own secret storms. No one could guess what mine looked like. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the glass and hardly recognize it. The woman staring back wasn't broken anymore. She was scarred, yes, but there was a quiet dignity in her eyes, the kind of strength that only comes from surviving what should have destroyed you. I started writing again. Not for anyone to read, just for myself. I wrote about the nights spent waiting, about the lies I had swallowed, about the papers that had stolen my name. But mostly, I wrote about the silence, how it used to terrify me, and how now it felt like peace. Words became the only thing that didn't betray me. Every sentence was a thread pulling me back into the world, reminding me that I still had a story that was mine to tell. One afternoon, I found an old photo tucked in my wallet, the one from our first week in America. We were both smiling, young and unbroken, standing in front of a small apartment that smelled like paint and promise. I looked at that version of myself, the girl who believed love could fix anything, and I whispered, "You did your best." Because she had. She loved with everything she had, even when the world told her she didn't belong. She fought to stay when leaving would have been easier. She signed papers she couldn't read because she believed in someone who never deserved it. And for that, she deserved forgiveness. Not from others, but from herself. I knew I couldn't stay in that city. Too many ghosts. Too many memories that replayed every time I passed a familiar street. So I packed my few things, left the motel key on the nightstand, and walked to the bus station. The man behind the counter asked where I was headed. I didn't know what to tell him. There was no destination that felt like home anymore. So I said the first thing that came to mind. "Anywhere that isn't here." He nodded, handed me a ticket, and said, "Sometimes that's the best place to start." As the bus pulled away, I looked out the window and watched the city fade into the horizon. The police lights, the house, the lies, all dissolving into distance. The woman who had arrived here years ago was gone. In her place sat someone who had learned that survival isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering differently. It's about standing in the ashes and saying, "I'm still here," not as a victim, but as proof that even betrayal can't erase your worth. I didn't know what waited ahead. Maybe another border, maybe another beginning. But as the miles passed, the weight on my chest began to lift. I thought about the people who had loved me once, the friends I'd lost, the strangers who had shown me small kindnesses. I thought about the woman with kind eyes at the police station and her words, "You've been living the end for a long time." She was right. That day had been the end, but it was also the first breath of something new. Night fell over the highway, and the reflection of my face in the glass was framed by the passing lights. I didn't look away this time. I saw the lines, the weariness, the quiet courage that had carried me through the storm. I touched the glass lightly and whispered, "You made it." And for the first time in years, I believed it. Now, when I think back to that house, to the sirens, to the glue, to the lies, I don't feel hate. I feel gratitude. Because without that fire, I would have stayed invisible. Without that betrayal, I would have never learned that even the most broken hearts can build something beautiful out of what's left. So if anyone ever asks what happened to the woman who glued her husband to the bed, I hope the answer isn't just that she lost everything. I hope they say she found herself in the wreckage, that she walked away barefoot and brave, with nothing but her truth, and built a life that was finally her own. And to the woman I used to be, the one who stayed too long, who forgave too much, who loved the wrong man, I owe her everything, because she endured enough pain to make me unbreakable. If you're still listening now, if you've made it through every word of my story, then maybe you understand. Healing doesn't come from revenge, or from justice, or even from time. It comes the moment you stop waiting for someone to save you, and decide to save yourself. So thank you for listening, for staying until the end. If my story touched you, leave a comment that says, "I'm still here," because that simple truth, surviving, standing, breathing, is more powerful than any betrayal. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more stories that remind you you're not alone, and watch the next one that's appearing on your screen right now, because somewhere out there, another woman is still trying to find her voice. And maybe tonight she'll hear it in mine.